of ways. So we have a lot of things currently going on in American politics, and we have a very special guest, good friend of the show, UEP, here with us to discuss everything American politics. UEP, how are you today?
I'm good. How about you? Good to be here. Excited.
I'm doing well. So there's a lot of different things that are, really important that are going on. Um, Amongst them are the State of the Union address, which just concluded. Um, Very interesting speech we saw from President Joe Biden, and we've seen a lot of different things. And I think that, as a matter of fact, we're live right now on another link. I think something happened with that. I'm gonna go on to the other chat, I guess, and then see if I can fix that. Because I want people to join. Sorry for the technical difficulties, guys. If you're watching ahead of time, if you were watching this, I guess previously, or no, if you're watching this in the future, I apologize for these technical difficulties here with getting started. I'm sharing this link right now with the other live stream. Sorry about that, guys.
Ready. I have. It should be up now.
Let me post that new link. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna delete this post once people start to join. Okay, we're getting people here. Perfect, beautiful, and I think people have gotten. We've gotten the link. Um, Technical difficulty, guys. I'm again so sorry. Not the greatest thing. Um, but yeah, this is the new link. Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah.
Today's been
Okay.
a little crazy with technology. We've had several technical difficulties. Um, so UP, can you share that on your Twitter? The new link I sent in
Yes.
the
It
chat.
it has been posted. Um. Yeah.
Because
It's on
we,
Twitter.
as a matter of fact, have two of them right live. So I'm gonna take this one off of YouTube. So and
All
I'm
right.
gonna
Also,
make this one.
guys, y'all are free to ask questions in the chat. We're going to be covering the elections going on in Texas right now, as well as State of the Union. We can also talk politics here. We know this stream is going to be a little more mellow than
Right. So
usual, but yeah.
yeah, there's going to be a lot of different things we're going to be talking about. So the first thing I wanted to start off is with the State of the Union and the direct impacts we've seen, I guess, from the State of Union address. There have been a variety of different things that have occurred with the State of the Union that have really been, it's been an important development. In many ways, I think the State of the Union speech was one of Biden's best. I think that in many ways, a lot of the things Biden said, I think, were definitely stretching the truth or focusing on certain parts of things. But rhetorically, the way that he made it sound, the way that everything seemed, very positive speech on Joe Biden. I think it's been one of his best speeches in a while. Of course, he had his hiccups, but I think, as a matter of fact, this speech was very well done on the part of Biden. UP, I know that you didn't watch this speech or didn't watch it completely.
I
Um,
watched parts of it, but yeah.
Parts of it. On your behalf, you were focusing more on the Texas primaries. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so right now we've got a bit of a showdown going on in Texas, and one of the main primaries we're going to be focused on tonight. And it's the 28th Congressional District, where we've got incumbent Democrat Henry Cuellar trying to fend off a challenge from the left from progressive Jessica Cisneros. And right now it's really tight. Cisneros is currently leading by just over 1,000 votes, with about 55% of the vote in. So it's still anyone's race here. It's all in the field. But Cisneros is a narrow lead. We'll be watching that race all night. We'll be covering it for you. But the big, I think, shift towards Cisneros happened a few months ago, back when Henry Cuellar's house was raided by the FBI, and he had that scandal. And before that, I think that this race was really anyone's game. I think Cuellar could have won. I could have easily seen Cisneros still winning, but after that, Cisneros seemed to really have the energy going into election day. Right now, it's pretty close. Right now, Cuellar can still win, but Cisneros has the energy, and she's currently leading right now. So if that lead holds, it'll be a big win for progressives, especially in an area that's in southern Texas that in this seat is very Hispanic as well. So it will be interesting to see how Hispanics in Texas feel, but where they want the Democratic Party to go. If they want Cuellar, it's likely that Hispanics want the Democratic Party to trend in a more moderate direction. But if it's more Cisneros is on the more left-wing part of the party, and so that could be an indicator that Hispanics in Texas want the Democratic Party to keep going a little further to the left. So that'll be interesting to watch. We've also got some primaries going on statewide in Texas. Greg Abbott, Beto O'Rourke, Ken Paxton, all up here. Beto O'Rourke has already won his race. He will officially be the Democratic nominee for governor in Texas in 2022. Greg Abbott is likely going to win his race as well. But we've also got an interesting attorney general race where Ken Paxton is currently leading. He's likely to be headed to a runoff against either George P. Bush, likely George P. Bush, but we're going to have to see where that goes. So, yeah, that's all we've got for Texas right now. We're going to keep you posted. And by the way, you can also feel free to ask questions in the chat about politics, and we can discuss those as well.
Yeah, I mean, those primaries are really important, as we can see. These are the first real primaries for 2022. And what we're seeing is, in many ways, the establishment parts of the party have won in certain parts. And I think that now there's like new establishments within the party. I think that when you talk about an establishment Republican, textbook definition, of course, is going to be your old textbook Republican. But in present day, I think that that has shifted a little bit. Your average Republican today is going to be far more with Trump, far more on that side of the party. And as for the Democrats, the establishment Democrats are going to be the same type old corporate Democrats. For the Democrats, I was looking at some of the results, and I saw that in certain races, you saw progressive back candidates do well. Now, in other cases, we saw, progressive candidates not do well. You had, incumbents that have been in power or have been on those seats are well recognized within their districts. And that's a factor. And as for the more Trump-leaning Republicans, you've seen, again, a very mixed outcome. So I think that that is going to be important as we move forward with different primaries going on. It's going to be very interesting to see what that dynamic is going to be, because that's going to be what is going to be definitive of the 2022 midterms. If Donald Trump and his side of the party have power, if Biden and his side of the party have power, if AOC on her side of the power have power, so it's going to be very definitive. UP, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, I totally agree. I think it also speaks a lot to the trajectory of the country as a whole. And I think primaries right now are headed in a direction for both the Republicans and the Democrats, in a direction that's more likely to be favoring candidates on the more extreme sides of those parties. So, as you mentioned, the Republican Party is getting a lot more Trumpy. It was not, the Republican Party even 10 years ago was the party of suburban, college-educated voters, and now it's more the party of working class, rural voters who are more likely to support more populist or paleo-conservative policies that would be likely to benefit American workers, or would supposedly benefit American workers, and kind of having an America first sort of overlay. And that's what the GOP is now, but it wasn't always that way. Mitt Romney was not, necessarily an America first candidate. It depends on what you view as America first, but he was not necessarily someone who branded his campaign on that the way Trump and other Republicans have. Democrats have something similar going on where, AOC and Bernie Sanders, that wing of the party is getting more and more dominant, especially in the House of Representatives. They've got a progressive caucus in the House now, and they're able to, force a lot of votes, and they've got a lot more power than they did even in 2016. So, I think the Republicans more so than the Democrats are having that shift, but the Democrats, I think, are in the early stages of having that shift. So we've got some questions in the chat if you want to get to those as well.
Yeah, that's fine. We can start getting with those, and then in a little bit I want to move forward into talking about the State of the Union, discussing the policy that was discussed, because I think ultimately very important the things we saw there. So I mean, you can get started and take some questions.
I think you cut out for a second. You might want to repeat what you just said.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back in.
All right. So we can go ahead and take questions. Um, can you start?
Oh, yeah, sure. I can get to the first question that I got here, which is who won the 2022 Florida Senate race. I've got Rubio winning. He'll probably win by an amount like 8 to 10%. And I know that sounds like a lot, especially in Florida, because Florida, usually comes down to the wire. But the trends in 2022 just aren't good for Democrats. Biden's approval is even worse than it was at the beginning, where I think Hispanics, now we've seen some polls where Hispanics as a whole, not even just in the state of Florida, but Hispanics nationwide, now disapprove of Joe Biden by a little bit. It'll vary by the poll. We've seen some polls where Biden's up with Hispanics, somewhere he's down. But the fact that it's this close is really bad, considering Hispanics are supposed to be a core block for the Democratic Party. Now, in Florida, I know Hispanics are a lot more mixed than nationwide. In Florida, specifically Cubans came out big for Donald Trump. So we're going to have to see what that means in 2022, but it does not look good for Democrats, especially in Florida, because of that large Hispanic population that's likely to trend against them. And so I do think Marco Rubio is going to do very well with Hispanics in Miami-Dade County, in that southern part of the state where, I'm sure PPT can talk much more about that because he's actually from Florida. But I do expect Rubio to do well with Hispanics. I expect him to do well with suburban voters. And I think the reason that he'll win by even more than Trump in Florida is because Trump did not do well with suburban voters in, Tampa, Jacksonville, or Orlando. And Rubio Rubio being a bit more moderate, I think, on a lot of issues, will be able to, it'll give him the ability to, kind of pull in some voters voting for Joe Biden in the suburbs that have college degrees that might, be a little more moderate, to come over to his side and vote for the Republican Party in 2022.
Right. I think that Florida's case is very interesting in a variety of different ways. I think one part you have the Hispanic factor, which is a big factor, but then I think what's going to be more influential than the Hispanic vote itself, it's going to be more influential than other factors, is going to be the very big importance on having the right messaging. I know a lot of voters. I mean, people who have been longtime Democrats. I've been talking to. And these are people who've been voting for years and years. And, they told me they're not happy with the Florida Democratic Party. They haven't, they're considering not voting for certain people. And they haven't voted for certain candidates in the past because they can't come up with, the right campaign. And for a lot of people, this person is aligned to Trump, that this person is racist, xenophobic. That campaign is not going to work in many parts of the country, including Florida. And Florida is one of those states where I think that, generally speaking, it's very moderate. It's a swing state. You of course have the extremes on both sides of the aisle. In the middle, you have a lot of suburban voters who, they're not going to take a lot of BS. And looking at how the Democrats have structured their messaging, if you just look at campaigns' Twitter accounts, that's kind of just showing their platforms. What are a lot of these candidates focusing on? DeSantis bad, Rubio bad, Trump this, Trump that, Trump that. And it is clear Democrats are not going to win an election. Not today, not in November, not in 2024, if they only focus on Trump. They have to expand, their policies. They have to expand different things. And at this point, now they're doing that. And the things that they're expanding on, for a lot of these swing voters, it's popular with the base. You see a lot of different policies they have. With swing voters is going to be a problem. And there is a disconnect, I think. You repeat?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that I'll even take it a step further and I'll say that the Democrats have a really big Trump problem. And what I mean by that is in 2020 and in 2018 as well, basically for the entirety of when Trump was president, Democrats were able to win districts, especially in the suburbs, that they didn't usually win. And it was partially, now I get the suburbs are trending Democratic, there's no denying that. But I think part of that, this swing was accelerated because Donald Trump was so unpopular with voters who had college degrees, even if they were Republicans. I know a lot of Republicans who had college degrees who really did not like Trump, despite the fact they voted for Mitt Romney 4 years prior. So there were a lot of those voters. I'm sure you guys in the chat know a lot of those voters as well. And they came out for Democrats in 2018 and 2020. Now, the midterm's not here yet. Who's to say exactly how they're going to vote in 2022? But we can, make some educated guesses. And In 2021, in the Virginia governor's race, the Republicans flipped that seat in a pretty interesting upset where Glenn Youngkin did really well in the Northern Virginia suburbs, and he beat out Terry McAuliffe because McAuliffe did not run a good campaign. McAuliffe, was running a kind of Trump bad campaign, just saying, Glenn Youngkin is Donald Trump, and I'm sure some voters thought that, but they were probably going to vote Democrat anyways, and he didn't do a good job of taking the swing voters in the suburbs he needed because they didn't buy it. They didn't buy the whole Glenn Youngkin is Trump thing. Youngkin ran on education, he ran on moderate issues, and people thought, is Glenn Youngkin really Trump? I don't think so, and that handed the race to McAuliffe. So unless Democrats can somehow convince everyone that every Republican is Donald Trump, which, spoiler alert, they probably can't. I think it's wise for them to move on from Donald Trump, move on from his presidency, and try, to run a campaign that's more focused on the issues as opposed to saying Trump bad, Democrats good, because those campaigns just they haven't really worked out for Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, and just I want to take a look a little bit more at, the State of the Union is a perfect example. What are the Democrats really doing? And the speech on Biden's part, I think that delivery wise, how the speech was written, it was a well written speech. I'm not gonna lie, because what did he do? He essentially got all the things he wanted to say, and he just used a tone that I guess we haven't seen this in a while because Trump's tone of speaking and Trump's tone when it came to giving speeches like State of the Union was definitely different. I think that um, what Biden was trying to do was get more empathetic and say, like, I've been there too, and those things. It's a different thing, and I mean both strategies are effective. I think that one is more effective at exciting your base, and one is more at trying to unite the country. What Biden did was he essentially focused on Ukraine. When he got to the things that really needed to be talked about, and again, this is not to undermine the situation in Ukraine. I'm going to comment on that a little bit later because I think that is horrendous what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. It is a disaster. But what we saw Biden do throughout the speech was pivot from topic to topic and come up with excuses why things are not done, and then give things that either people did not know about or things that he has done. And I have a feeling that's how the midterm is going to be. And ultimately, you can point at job numbers all you really want. You can point at them and say, look, the economy is doing so great. We're all doing great right now. The economy is great. There's millions of new jobs. Um, but there's other economic factors that I think must come into consideration. Inflation, big problem right now. You take a look at, there's a labor shortage. I mean, yeah, there's new jobs, but there's not enough people to fill them because people have either moved jobs. There's a lot of variety of different reasons. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to the midterms, those are the things that are going to matter. And I think what this speech we saw tonight, what it really showed was what Democratic messaging is likely going to look like.
Absolutely, and I think that party unity is going to be really big, and yeah, actually, not even party unity. I think country unity is going to be really big for Biden because Biden ran as a candidate in 2020, if you remember, as the candidate who's going to restore the soul of the nation, who is going to uh, bring back America to the days of when we were all united. And I think everyone wants America to be united. And, I can have my views, PPT can have his views, everyone else can have their views. But frankly, we're not a united country right now. Whether it's Biden's fault or not, we're not united. And we don't really have a way of getting united anytime soon. And so I think on that part, it's been a failure. Not necessarily saying it's Joe Biden's fault. It might be. That's not my job to determine. But it is still a fact, unfortunately, that as a country, we're still very divided. We're still very polarized, and we're still very cutthroat in terms of, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat. So I think when Biden talked about unity in his speech, I think obviously it's good the president wants us to be united because we're the United States. But at the same time, I don't think that registered with a ton of people because at this point, it seems like, the same rhetoric, not red states, not blue states, United States. And I think that swing voters have heard that a million times. They're like, I don't care. You guys say that every year and we're not united right now. So, it's obviously good that Biden, has attempted to make it seem like we're united and is saying we are the United States. We are united. It's still not, to be quite frank, I think for a lot of voters who've been around for a while, it kind of went in one ear and went out the other. It's not a new tactic.
Right. I mean, because ultimately, that's like you said, the same thing that people have been listening for years. Same thing comes out of every politician's mouth. Ultimately, I think what's really going on in the U.S. is rather than liberal and conservative, I mean, there's some influence of that. People want change. Whether that change comes in the way of someone like Donald Trump, where you have that type of rhetoric, or it comes like someone like Bernie Sanders, people want change because, I mean, and a lot of things that were said, people want, again, but we've seen many examples of how, for example, a couple months back, I saw a report where the Biden administration, they were going to do a healthcare plan, and what they did is they got exactly almost word for word what Big Pharma wanted them to say, and he said it. And those are the type of things that show that they're not really changing. Those are not the things that are not really changing, because ultimately, if you're just going to do the same thing that every other establishment politician has done for so many years, there's not really change. And I think that's a growing sentiment in the United States. Just take a look at all these different elections that have happened. And people do not care if you're associated with this person or that person, like we saw in the Virginia governor's race. I mean, they could have put Glenn Youngkin like right next to Donald Trump and said he's like Donald Trump's right hand man. And I think in many ways it was a close race. Glenn Youngkin could have still pulled off the victory or still done very well because people care about policies. People do not care. I mean, subliminally, if you were with Trump or not, those type of things. So I think that in many ways it's more about policy. And moving forward, if you do not start focusing on policy, and if you just want to fight the culture war, which is what we're seeing on both sides of the aisle, with throwing around that you're a communist, you're this, or you're a racist, you're xenophobic, you're whatever, all those different things, you're not going to win races. Not today, again, not tomorrow. It's going to be something that both parties really need to change, and it's just a big part of the big American cultural war that exists today.
Yeah. So we're gonna pivot right back to that, but we've got some new questions. I also want to give a quick update on Texas's 28th district primary. So since I last gave you guys an update, Jessica Cisneros was at about 51% of the vote, and if she had finished with that, vote share, she would have won and been the Democratic nominee. What we might see is a runoff, because right now Cisneros is still ahead, but that gap is now narrowed to just over 1,000 votes as opposed to 1,400 like it was a few minutes ago.
Very close.
She's now leading 49.8 to 45.4%. And I mean, in Texas, if you finish with a plurality vote, like you say, you win 48% to 45%, or I guess in this case 49 to 46%, like Cisneros is doing, you go to a runoff. So even if she wins the most votes, she still has to get to 50% to avoid a runoff. And yeah, we've also got some questions in the chat. We saw we've got looks like we'll easily win. Interesting. Did you know the House passed a bill that would make lynching a hate crime today? Yeah, I did see that. Yeah, it was I think 432 to 3. Only 3 people.
And of course, it was 3 Republicans that were wanting to completely go on their crazy, that's what we're seeing. I mean, these type of things, I think that honestly should be passed with no opposition. I think it's ridiculous if you're voting against a bill like this. But I saw that, and I mean, this should have been a law a long time ago. I wonder why that hasn't happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Senate's gonna have to vote on it. I mean, like, I imagine it would pass the Senate.
It's probably gonna pass the Senate.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
Only 3 Republicans in the House voted against it, I think it's very likely that we see the Senate.
Yeah, it's probably gonna pass the Senate. What else do we got? We've got so this person says people want change but don't trust the current government / party structures to bring that change. So I've understood this past year. I mean, that's an interesting take. I totally respect that. And I think to a certain extent you're right. I think a lot of people do feel that way. Because I think people want change, but I don't think people really think the Democrats or the Republicans can bring that change. Whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, I don't think people really think changes, fundamental change is going to be brought to this country. So there are people that feel that way.
This could bring a lot of different things, as a consequence of this change that people want. What we could see are, fringe parties trying to show up, a third party, not fringe parties, because I think they're going to bring a lot of presidents. And you see, the problem right now, I think, with the U.S. is, over the course of history, it's just become a 2-party system. And, I think that both 2-party systems and then multi-party systems, they have both have their pros and cons. I mean, building a coalition is a headache. You know, governing like that with the uncertainty if like the power is really going to be there to like have years of control and making sure everything passes. Because the problem with coalition governments is just that for one issue you have the votes and then everything else gone because the coalition doesn't agree. That's something that I guess the two-party system protects. But then you also have the effects that you have so many different ranging political views in one party. You have essentially a far right, like white nationalist, someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, part of the Republican Party, together in the same party with someone like Mitt Romney, who is like completely drastically different. And not to say that those two people represent the whole identity of the Republican Party, because I don't think it's true in the same way that if you were to say of extremists, communists on the Democratic side, and someone like Joe Manchin, you have two opposing sides of the party, and they're together. And honestly, I think that does a disservice to the American people, because you see so many different political thoughts gathered together as one. And what that creates is constant negotiation between the old parties to see what they're going to do. And ultimately, what that leads to is same old with same status quo, leading to with same policies they've always wanted to lead with. And again, that is a problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that uh, more so the Democrats than the Republicans, but the Republicans have this not problem, but this scenario too. The Democratic Party is a big tent party. They are very much a party uh, of uh, of I think a lot of ideological groups, and they're very much the party of we got AOC on one end, uh, and then we've got Joe Manchin, even Ben Nelson, Kirsten Sinema on the other end, and I think that is a lot of ideologies in one party. Like I think AOC once said that if we were in another country, we would be in different parties. So the Democrats specifically are a large tent party.
I want to talk about this comment for a second. So, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene was just at an event that was known to be a white nationalist event, and I'm not saying this to be. I'm just saying the facts at this point. And it's important to cover all sides of the story. I mean, I think in many cases, people like Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene have been completely screwed by the media in certain ways being unfairly covered. But I mean, I think that's a fact. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, if you don't want to call her a white supremacist, at the least she is very far right to a point where you see it's talking now to kind of the extremist side of the Republican Party. So what we're really talking about here is different extremes, because I think it's clear that when it comes to different thoughts and things like that, Marjorie Taylor Greene is clearly not the same as someone as Mitt Romney, for example. So I think it's important to make those different and denote that.
Okay. Interesting. Do you want to? I guess I could briefly address the news in Texas. So, in Texas right now, we just got some important news. So, obviously, just to run over, Beto O'Rourke did earlier today win that primary to run against the Republicans. He'll be the Democratic nominee for governor. Right now, the Texas Lieutenant Governor Democratic primary is really close. We've got Collier and Beckley right now locked in combat for that first place spot, and then we've got Braley in third place. So remember, right now Collier's at 44%. So he's going to have to likely go to a runoff. But yeah, we'll have to see what or who comes in second. Really, it could be Beckley, could be Braley, but that'll be a runoff in all likelihood. The Texas Attorney General Garza is currently for the Democratic primary. Garza is currently ahead there, but still below 50%, so likely a runoff as well. And then the interesting race we've been covering for, I guess, for governor is between Greg Abbott and Alan West. But West was expected to come in second place, but it looks like as of right now, it's that could still change, but it looks like right now he's on his way to being in third place because in that primary for the Texas GOP governor, I'm going to pull it up right now just to make sure. We've got governor primary. Sorry. Greg Abbott has won the Republican primary, but Alan West barely came in second place. Sorry, he was in third place for a while, but he won. He's currently ahead of his third place opponent by just 8,000 votes. So Greg Abbott easily won that primary. Beto O'Rourke easily won his primary. So the matchups we're going to be seeing in the Texas gubernatorial election are going to be Abbott versus Beto O'Rourke, which will be interesting.
That's going to be a very interesting race. I want to see what's going to happen because over the last month, we've seen a couple of months, we've seen heightened pressure on Greg Abbott because we've seen, essentially social media, media, even people that don't live in Texas, completely attack him. I think that Greg Abbott still has the support. I think a lot of things that he has done are popular in Texas. And, a lot of things that people don't realize is when you're commenting on a lot of these situations, it's important to take the context. Things like, for example, the abortion bill, I think transport was another thing. Those were things that are popular in Texas. And if you take a look at a national scale, that might not be popular in New York or California, for example, where a lot of people are tweeting on their phones, whatever. So I think one of the things that we have seen is we've seen a lot of pressure, especially on Republicans, with all the things that the left likes to call racist, whatever, all those different things. A lot of it, I think, really has to do with that context because a lot of the times it's people who don't even live in the state, and I think Beto O'Rourke is burnt as a politician. I don't think he has a chance. I think at this point, unless miraculously the Democrats can somehow figure it out. I think that Beto O'Rourke, his policies are not popular in Texas. One of the big things that Texans love is their guns. They love that freedom, and I think it's something that you have to consider. Context is very important for these races. Beto O'Rourke, I don't think he's going to be able to do it. We're not in the same 2018 environment.
Yeah, so the issue that I think Beto O'Rourke has is that he was a really good candidate in 2018. He almost beat Ted Cruz, and he outperformed basically everyone's expectations, including, mine and yours. So Beto did really well in 2018, and I thought that from that point, he could really build up as a politician. And, Texas getting bluer and bluer, I think that, in a few years, maybe, a decade or something, he could have flipped a Senate seat in Texas. He could have won statewide. He could have, he could have really done a lot of things. But I think, to be honest, he gambled, and I think, to be quite frank, he got a little cocky. I thought, in retrospect, it looks like he, rightfully, he got a lot of attention for almost beating out Ted Cruz in 2018, but I think that he took that momentum a little too far when he ran for president. Sure, running for president is cool because it gives you national attention as opposed to just statewide attention, but he campaigned very differently in 2020 than in 2018. In 2020...
Yeah.
Yes, sorry,
I really think that what Beto O'Rourke really was doing is the same thing that Stacey Abrams did. She was the pretend governor of Georgia. That's literally it's nearly the same thing. Being the failed candidate, these people he was a representative in the House, but a lot of the things don't qualify you directly to run for president. I think one of the things that we're going to see in the future is anyone who wants to run for president is going to start running for president, even if they don't have a chance. And I think we saw it with Stacey Abrams. I think that's going to be an interesting race. Oh, and Georgia's going to be an interesting primary because of Kemp and Purdue, considering that
Purdue too.
Who do you think is going to win that primary?
That I've said it multiple times. I would never want to touch that race. If I'm betting, I'm staying away from Georgia primary. But if I had to guess, I'd say Kemp. Purdue is going to have to really rely on getting out a bunch of Trump voters. But to be honest, when he ran for that runoff in 2021, he wasn't able to do that. Him and Loeffler really blew it, to be honest. That was a race that he should have won pretty easily in a state. Biden won Georgia by a dime and a hamburger bun. It was very, very close. And he was running on a day that wasn't, presidential election. And he wasn't able to get any turnout from Republicans. He lost that race that, quite frankly, he should have won by probably 4 or 5 points. And so, if Purdue wasn't able to get out the Trump vote in a critical Senate race against a Democrat, I don't think he can do it against a Republican that won in 2018. So I've got Kemp, but like I wouldn't be stunned if Purdue wins. I think that they both have appeal to both rural and suburban voters, but I just think Kemp is the incumbent, is just the favorite right now. But I wouldn't
I
be
think
stunned if
something
Purdue
that
wins.
really did it for Purdue was the recency, I guess, from one of the things that we saw was that it was a lot of recency bias, I guess, from the attacks on the Capitol or whatever you want to call it. I think that was that was a detrimental thing because like fresh in the minds of the people. I think that in many ways that's not going to be a factor anymore again in this race. I think Purdue does have appeal. Now, if people are going to hold a grudge, which is something that is to be seen, I think that one of the things the Republicans are going to have to like worry about in many ways is the Democratic messaging about January 6th. I think that honestly it's not going to be a big deal for them. But I mean, you've seen mainstream media, what they've been covering all of last year was January 6th, January 6th, January 6th, January 6th. Maybe as a distraction for some of the things that were really going on, a lot of different things. But I think that's going to play a role, at least, in the midterms.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the Democrats would be making a mistake if they were running solely on January 6th and solely on Trump, because as we saw in Virginia in November, that message resonates with some voters, but not even close to a majority, especially in the suburbs, where I think a lot of voters aren't going to fall for that. I think voters want to see policy. They want to see, this is what I'm going to do if I'm elected to the Senate, to be governor, to the House, whatever. And so in 2022, if I'm a Democratic advisor, I'd be saying, hey, I don't think enough voters really care about something that happened almost 2 years ago. So, yeah, to be quite frank, I think the Democrats will be shooting themselves in the foot in a lot of races if they focus on January 6th entirely.
So we have a question. So here is this question: can Democrats win after the midterms after Biden's speech? I don't think it's going to be as big a factor. I think what Biden did tonight, rhetorically speaking, and looking at how the speech was written, I think it was an appealing speech. I would say it's among his better-ish performances. Like, I mean, I think that's one of the best times I've seen him speak during his campaign or whatever. But what he did during his speech was rely on Ukraine and said, and I want to talk about Ukraine a little bit because it is horrendous what Russia is doing in Ukraine. At this point, it is completely ridiculous what is going on. But he focused a lot to kind of pivot from the real points. And we got to the things he needed to talk about. The economy, he talks about jobs, but people care about inflation. Because the problem right now is that it's not like people are out of jobs. I think if you want to go work today, you can find a job almost anywhere you really want. You turn the corner, in almost every single company, there is now hiring signs or now hiring ads for more professional workplaces. The big thing is that that's what people care about. People are not going to really care if you added 6 million jobs to the economy when those jobs are either A, not getting filled, or B, you're seeing huge inflation of a variety of things. I think the speech could have swayed some voters, and some is a pretty small number because ultimately November is still far away, and I think everything that happened from here to November is gonna have way more impact than this. You agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to touch on a few things. So, first of all, just to and like I'm sure we're going to talk about Russia, Ukraine in a second, but I think to focus on what Biden said about the economy, I think it's important to say that two things can be true, and even though these two things seems to contradict, I think that they're true, and I think a lot of people think they're true. The economy right now is in pretty good shape. It's not perfect, whether it's Biden or not, I'm not going to say, but the economy right now, we're not in a recession. We're not facing I know we have inflation problems, but it's not insane. We've had it worse under
I
basically,
think 8% is pretty
yeah.
high though. I mean,
Well,
8%
it's
is
high. No, it's I'm not gonna comment. It's high, but I think that it's not like recession level. Like this is really bad high. It's a problem, but it's not high enough to make it say, "Oh my God, we're in a recession." So I think that it can be true that the economy right now and Biden has created like I think more jobs than or he's netted more jobs in his first year than I think any other president in the past, I think, like
Right,
40
but
years
that's
or
also
something.
because of the
So,
pandemic.
like,
And
no, I'm
right,
like this isn't like me defending Biden, like being against
right,
him.
right, right. I
I'm
get you.
saying that I think that there are statistics you can use to say that Biden's doing both a good and a bad job. Inflation makes it seem like he's doing a bad job. Not job numbers make it seem like he's doing a good job. What I'm saying is that I think both things can be true, and I think it's messaging. Messaging will decide how voters vote. And right now, the GOP is winning that battle because it's the GOP is making it seem like inflation. Oh my God, and so if they can get voters, especially voters who are working class or who are worried about their job security, which is a very real worry now in America, if they can get those voters on their side in 2022, they'll be winning a lot of races in a lot of key states.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, it's really about messaging. And when you look at a messaging point of view, for example, it's a hell of a lot easier to say you're paying more for groceries, and these are facts. You're paying more for groceries, you're paying more for gas. You're, buying a house is nearly and down impossible in most places around the country because it's so expensive. It is ridiculous to the point where most people are going to care. And honestly, the jobs kind of argument works when you either have high unemployment, which the unemployment today is relatively high. It's still it's not as bad. It's not as bad as in the past. Um, but yet again, the inflation is what people are going to care about, and I think in 99% of the country, unless that you're in a place where inflation doesn't matter, which there's certain parts out there, and ultimately again, I want to get to this point here that both parties really need to understand that different states have different values, and it's going to come down to something that again parties should do regardless. Pick and choose where you're going to focus your money. And if nationalizing everything, which is easier just to nationalize races, um, is going to have those effects. Something that one person said one side of the country is going to completely impact something else on the other side of the country.
Yeah, again, and it's like you said, it's certainly easier to message to a country when the economy is good. But yeah, I think messaging is really underrated in politics. Like you can have like a pretty bad economy, and if your opponents don't know how to message against you and your party knows how to message, I think you can still come out of an election quite fine. So, yeah. Now, I also do want to do a quick update on the Texas 28th Democratic primary before we pivot.
Go ahead.
So, with 60% of the vote in, Cisneros has gotten over 50% again. Right now, Hurley has kind of stabilized at 49, 50%. It looks like she's going to get the most votes tonight. Cuellar still could win, but it looks like if I had to bet, I'd say Cisneros has probably an 80, 90% chance of getting the most votes tonight. But as we're seeing right now, Cuellar, Cisneros is, whether she finishes at 49 or 50% is really important because if she finishes at 50%, she won't have to go to runoff. She'll be the de facto candidate for Democrats in this seat. If she does finish with 49%, she'll go to a runoff. So right now, Cuellar's probably got his fingers crossed for a runoff right now. But that's just my quick update on the 28th District of Texas. Stay posted.
So here's something I want to talk about. So here, for example, we see the viewpoint that cultural leftists are destroying America, and I think that in many ways, part of this is going to be a very big part of midterms. The culture war essentially is a big thing in the midterms because on one hand you have, you know, a lot of the different like movements that I think have definitely like radicalized in many ways. And when I say radicalized, I'm talking about moving faster on the left, for example, like certain aspects of like CRT, like it's the things that you mentioned down there. Those are things that are going to be big parts, and as well and cancel culture and things like that. But I think a lot of the aspect of it is going to be how Republicans react to it, because I think at a general level, when it comes to a lot of these cultural issues, the controversy arises from the Democrats' point of view in the generalized way, right? So I think in many ways, if the reaction is eloquent in a way, if it's well stated and the point is well made, that's going to have a very bad impact for the Democrats. Like we saw in Virginia, I think in Virginia that's another key factor. I think the Democrats are underestimating how much parents care about their children's education. They're and honestly, that's a very bad mistake they're making right there because ultimately they should look at groups of people like suburban women as groups they can grow on, not groups that they're thrown away. And something that I realized the Democrats have become experts at doing over the last couple of years is, okay, they did good with a group of voters 1 year. The next year, they throw that away and they go and try to work on the group they lost, I guess, in the last election. In 2016, for example, they lost, support in the Midwest. So they're like, okay, they went semi all out. I think they went pretty all out last year, or in 2020 rather, for Midwestern voters. And what happened? Hispanic voters completely like shifted. And I think in this election, they're taking people like suburban women for granted, and that's gonna spell out trouble for them because ultimately those are the big supporters they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to what you said earlier, which I think is really, really important. I think it cannot be stressed enough. Democrats, and I'm saying this as someone who isn't attempting to, like, I'm gonna, like, tonight I'm trying to be unbiased. I'm not perfect, but I'm gonna say that I'm gonna try to criticize both parties here and talk more strategy than I am politics. But I think the Democrats are making a really big mistake if they think that their parents don't care about their children's education. Now, I'm not saying the Democrats do or don't care about parents' children's education. What I'm saying is that in the Virginia gubernatorial election last November, they acted as if they did not care. Terry McAuliffe in a debate literally said, "It is our decision, or it's not your parents' decision. Parents should not be part of kids' education." I think that really alienated a lot of parents. A lot of people really want to be comfortable and know what their kids are learning in school, especially in issues like social studies, in terms of race, in terms of uh, what is and isn't racist, or what is being taught in the classroom. And so, you know, I personally think critical race theory is kind of an arbitrary statement. I think that to understand critical race theory, you need to really go back to what it actually is. And critical race theory is actually I think it's a legal term that actually isn't being taught to most kids. It's just a broad term for a slightly different style of teaching in classes that are discussing issues like systemic racism. So obviously it's a really touchy subject for a lot of parents. I'm not going to comment on my views on it because I don't think that'd be productive here. But what I'm saying is that the Democrats need to convince suburban voters that parents, not politicians, will be first in their child's education. And that's why Terry McAuliffe lost the 2021 Virginia gubernatorial election, because Virginia, with a lot of suburbs, he did, I think, 15% worse than Biden in Loudoun County. He did worse in all of the Fairfax area, Northern Virginia. And I think that's mostly tied to his stance on education, that parents should not, be a part of it. And I think that really alienated a lot of voters who voted for Joe Biden, and that's why Virginia flipped in 2021.
Right. I think that overall, those type of issues are going to be very important. And again, a lot of it is because I think it's a proven fact. The left has a lot more control over institutions in the United States. That's just how things have evolved over time. And we're almost getting to a point where I think it's going to be a choke point, right? When it comes down to, a lot of people are going to realize, like, wow, like, this is not okay. Because then we're going to come to the point where, and I think this is somewhere where we're getting into something that the Republicans are really capitalizing on, is that authoritarianism, in the sense that everything's controlled, everything's one specific way, um, is heavily disliked amongst the American public, especially among centrists. Because a lot of the time, if you're a big time centrist, you're likely a libertarian type, I guess. So that's something that's really going to influence swing voters coming in the midterms. So it's going to be very, very important. And what I really think that with the culture where what we've seen is a lot of the Democrats, especially the far left part of the Democratic Party, what they've done is, like, they've been campaigning for a lot of these things. Like, they're campaigning in their for example, very, very liberal communities. But the reality of the country is that it's not like that, and in a lot of ways, it's definitely over exaggerated, in my opinion. And you see, with a very big variety of different issues, again, it's a messaging issue. The Democrats are putting on a pedestal the people who are probably in the one or well, that's a little, I think, but maybe like the 5 or 10% of their party, and kind of letting them conduct the messaging for the entire party. I think it's something that important the Democrats need to fix if they want to stay relevant moving forward, in the sense that they could start losing a lot of votes because of those issues.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we uh, definitely agree that Democrats are a messaging problem. But I also want to address a comment that I saw, which is about CRT, which is critical race theory, which comes from Marxism, and that CRT comes from leftist Marxism. So, um, I, not you specifically, but I encourage everyone to do more research on critical race theory. Critical race theory is a term used by legal scholars to describe teaching, and I'm an expert on CRT. You should do your own research, but uh, it's a term used by legal scholars to, I think, discuss the legacy of systemic racism in a different way than public schools used to teach it. And when kids in elementary school and even middle school aren't being taught critical race theory. It's like unless your child is taking advanced law courses at the age of 10, they're probably not learning critical race theory. What is happening though, and what I will say is that I think a lot of schools are more open to teaching different perspectives of history, which I think is a good thing. I think learning all perspectives is a good thing, especially when history is generally written by the winners and by the people in power. So I think it's really important to read all perspectives of history. So I'm just going to say that. I'm not going to comment any further. But I do want to briefly get back to another update for Texas 28th District, where Cisneros has expanded her lead to about 6.5%. But the catch there is that Henry Cuellar in the reported Starr County early vote. Starr County is a county in southern Texas that is expected to come out big for Cuellar. In the early vote, Cuellar was ahead by about 1,600, and that's going to be uploaded any second to New York Times. And right now, 1,600 would barely elapse Cisneros' lead. Cisneros currently has a lead, or sorry, would barely go under Cisneros' lead. Cisneros' lead is about 1,900. So that net gain of 1,600 for Cuellar is going to cut that gap to 200 or 300 votes, and it's going to be really, really close, and it will likely come down to a runoff as of right now.
Right. So I think, yeah, especially with the CRT is a very touchy subject. I mean, if you look at its roots, I think that they do come from Marx. If you follow the history, they do. And again, that's a problem. That's a conversation from another day that we can have later on. It's 11:08 on the East Coast, so I want to start kind of like in many ways wrapping this up. So last thing I really wanted to talk about, because I have school tomorrow, so it's not that I'm trying to, like, I guess, ditch you guys, but I want to talk about Ukraine for a second. And what is going on in Ukraine is a lack of of respect for the world on Vladimir Putin's part. I think what Putin is doing here is completely uncalled for. I think that it is horrendous what he's doing. There's nothing that he should be doing in Ukraine, and I mean, and this is one of those scenarios where, like, you're asking, what the hell are you fighting for? Because in the past you've seen wars in many types of war that there's actually a real reason why they're fighting. There's a territory or something. Here he was like, I'm feeling like I want to bother a little bit. I'm gonna go over these fringe claims about separate states and launch a full-scale invasion of the whole country. Are you kidding me? You know how many people have died? All those different things, ridiculous from Vladimir Putin. And I think at this point, there's a lot of different factors at play that are responsible for this, because there's a lot of different groups of governments that have been saying we're against Russia, like all this from like a long time ago. And then what's the first thing they do? They rely on Russia for gas. Looking at you, Germany. Like, I mean, Germany wanted to be protected from Russia. They wanted to give it more power so they could do crazy things, because that was the big global threat. And what's the first thing they do? They go out and give Russia more money. I think this whole Russia situation is ridiculous. I think in many ways could have been prevented by the Western world. But my word right now is, I think the Ukrainians have very, very good job defending their country. And I hope everything goes in the Ukrainians' favor. And at this point, I mean, Vladimir Putin deserves to go to prison. He, deserves a lot of things. So that's my my view with it right now.
Yeah, my heart aches for the people of Ukraine and everything that's happening in Ukraine right now. I feel awful that people are losing their innocent civilians are losing their lives because of a war that did not need to happen, because another country decided it would be a good idea to pick on a smaller country to be bombing cities that people live in, and the people that have no direct involvement to the war. So I totally stand by the people of Ukraine who are being uh, attacked mercilessly for really no reason. And I think it really is. It's sad, but also inspiring to see the people of Ukraine rising up to defend their country. We've seen stunning bravery, from those 13 soldiers on Snake Island, or I've seen videos of Ukrainian civilians, making Molotov cocktails, saying we don't want to hurt anyone, but if it comes to this, we're going to defend our country. So I do think that the people of Ukraine have proved that they are incredibly brave, incredibly amazing people in defending their country, and I stand by the people of Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, this situation is utterly ridiculous. Never should have happened. It's one of those situations where you look at it and you say, why? I mean, there is no
It's a disaster.
why. And ultimately, I think this is a really big wake up call for the United States. It's a big wake up call for the Europeans. I think the Europeans right now, they've woken up because they realized, shit, Russia is capable of doing crazy stuff. And I think that the United States should take a look for their interests. I think that we shouldn't play with our emotions too much because again, we can only do so much with the position that Russia is right now. Could have deadly consequences if the U.S. gets too involved. Support Ukraine all you can, but if you get directly involved in a conflict, that is no good for anyone.
Yeah, I just want to, obviously we're talking about right now is important, but I just want to briefly go back to State of the Union and some updates. So first of all, in a new poll released a few minutes ago by NBC, and I know polling is, very subjective. It's not always accurate, but, and I know when I say this, people are going to say, oh my God, polls always always overestimate Democrats. Well, the polling right now for Joe Biden's pretty bad. So the same polls that have had Biden, negative approval, and this is just one poll, but 70% of Americans approve of Joe Biden's State of the Union address. Now that is a very ambiguous poll. The number, it can be interpreted in many ways. I think a lot of Americans.
Like, the sample size you have to remember is
obviously it's one poll. It doesn't change the trajectory of anything. But I'm just saying it's interesting that there are a lot of Americans who probably don't like Joe Biden who like State of the Union address. There are probably a lot of Americans who are going to vote Republican in 2022. But probably did enjoy, or at least like Joe Biden's State of the Union address. So I think that, at this point, I think it's safe to say that he did a fairly good job in his speech, but that, that might not necessarily pay off in 2022.
So before I go, I want to comment a little bit on the discussion that's occurring in the chat. So when it comes to a lot of these things, I think a reason why everything's been so extremized is social media. I mean, social media has been the biggest thing because, I mean, people get in these long Twitter arguments, whatever, and people start getting crazy ideas because, they've been, like, arguing for days and days and days and days, and it's almost to a point it's ridiculous. And, I'm going to say that at this point in time, a lot of things that are going on right now, it's a lot of, extremism on both sides. The Democrats, I'm not going to say the Democrats, but the left has been completely, overdoing it. And I think in many ways, the right has also overreacted to many things. I think it's time for America to get their emotions in check. I think it's a time for people to actually look what's best for the country, not divide the country. And I think, one of the things that I've seen is that because of Donald Trump's presidency and his rhetoric, which was in many ways different from past presidents, where we saw Donald Trump be, a little bit more authoritative and take that approach to leadership, which again, different types of leaders lead different ways. And I think while Donald Trump's approach was different, it was still effective. You should take a look at compared to Trump. I think a lot of people, and because of Trump's rhetoric, people say he was a bad leader. People say that all the divisiveness that exists in the U.S. is because of Trump, and that is not true. 50 and 50, it's 50-50 in reality. You can't have divisiveness without both sides. So I think it's something that should be considered. And I think America, should come and check about that.
Yeah, I also just want to do a quick update, and we get back to this, but I know we're heading off soon. But I want to do an update for those of you who haven't been following it as closely. Cisneros, with 2/3 of the vote in, has fallen below 50%. She's at 49% of the vote. Cuellar's at 46% of the vote. That's a 3% lead for Jessica Cisneros. But what it means is that if she finishes the night, even if she's ahead at 49% of the vote, it'll go to a runoff, because in Texas, as I mentioned, you do need to get 50% of the vote in the first round to avoid a runoff. But that's just an update right there.
So here, I mean, I think to a certain extent, maybe it's not equal. But I think definitely both sides have played to it. In one hand, for example, if you take a look at the overreacting part, and then if you take a look at just the rhetoric, not rhetoric, but like the policy and extremist things, because again, a lot of the things we've seen, I think, development policy wise and like platform wise from the Democrats is things that would have been unheard of just 4 years ago from the same party. Like some of it's just when you see things proceed as quickly as like that is when you see a lot of divisiveness. And I think it's just a byproduct. I remember when Trump was running for office, you know, there's a lot of people that agree with him, but I know there's a hell of a lot of people who started to agree with him right after, or right during, or after his presidency. So I think a lot of it has to do with the implementation or radicalized. And when I say radicalized, it's just the exponential, I guess, movement of the political policies. Um, so I mean, for the Democrats, it's not that they have a lot of power in a lot of places. They're in many ways using it to, you know, move your ideology further. And I think it's the same way when we saw Donald Trump burst onto the scene back in 2015, and he started saying some of the things that people thought were crazy at the time, but then you take a look today and they're kind of normal. I think it's just a byproduct. But then this is a problem. I'm not saying that it's good that we're on that stage. It's just that I think politically there is that range.
Well, it's the Overton window, though, and the Overton window can be shifted in any direction. And what that means is that if you want to change general opinion on a certain topic, whether it be abortion, gay marriage, supposed critical race theory, anything really, you should. The theory of the Overton window, which I think is correct, is that you should begin by taking a very extreme position and saying, okay, if we're starting at the center, then we take an extreme position. Maybe we'll meet right here, which is still a little bit, left of center or whatever, or right of center, but it moves the needle towards X or Y direction. So I think that both parties are kind of doing that right now. And I think Trump did this when he was president. Biden, not as much, because I think Biden is a bit less loud than Trump was. But Trump did this when he was president. He kind of made things that were not normal under Obama seem normal because he did them so much. And, not Biden, because I think Biden's kind of he's more, not normal, but he's more quiet. Democrats who are a bit louder, who are a bit more willing to kind of get in the dirt with Republicans, are doing the same thing.
Right. I mean, I agree. And ultimately, I think it's just a showing of changing tides. I think a lot of the things that we've seen, especially I think culturally with the culture war, is also a byproduct of who our leaders become. Because I think a lot of the people who got the voices, I guess, for leadership for certain issues, because they had really good economic policies and things like that, they also take the opportunity to do the thing. And they're able to push whatever, I guess, cultural policy they want, right? On the left and the right. And sometimes, people could have great economic policies, and then they end up being doing horrible stuff, or things like that. They get voted into power in some ways, and you see that as a result. So I think that honestly, right now, the U.S. is in a very unhealthy state when it comes to that, like cancel culture and that culture of you know everyone being at everyone's throats because they disagree politically. I think that's very bad for the country, and the country needs to heal. But that is it for tonight. I have to go to bed because I have school tomorrow. Um, UEP, it's been a pleasure. Next primary, I guess, will be on your channel. Um, and we can enjoy the midterm season that's just starting.
All right, thank you so much. It was great to be on here. Thanks to everyone who participated in the chat. We appreciated it. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. See you guys in the I mean, later. I'm gonna have a video for you guys this week. There's there's been a lot going on, but I think now I can start making videos. I'm a little bit less busy, and yeah, I'm glad to have seen you guys. Glad for a very good discussion. We had a you know pretty nice discussion